Welcome to Assembly. I'm Ashlyn Burns, one of the founders of Assembly, a gallery based here in Houston, Texas. And Assembly curated a Web3 platform devoted to supporting photographic artists on the blockchain.
And I'm Erick Calderon. I'm the founder of Artblocks, which is a platform that enables generative artists to release works using digital object technology.
And this is Collecting the Future. This exhibition brings together artists from the Artblocks and Assembly platforms to explore the inherently digital nature of the works and how they're manifested in different forms, from work on a screen to prints to sculptural objects to interactive works. And we're also telling a very local story based here in Houston.
I think one of the most exciting things about generative art and the new way that it's being presented through digital objects is the fact that a lot of these artists, Matt DesLauriers being the creator of this piece called Meridian, have been working in this medium for a really, really long time and doing it out of pure passion. But if you take a step back even further, a lot of the artists in the generative art ecosystem have actually been using code repositories that are created by Matt DesLauriers years ago. And so anyone that's been around this kind of like creative coding space for a long time, there's a full circle moment here where we realize that we were all building and learning and creating something using each other's code and kind of working with each other, even before we realized that there was an opportunity for this type of artwork to get this level of recognition.
We were really interested in artists who were already dialoguing with the internet as source material. So similarly to Matt's having a shared code, all of these works, both Penelope Umbrico's and Daniel Gordon's, are using images shared on image sharing websites, like with Penelope in the early 2000s, Flickr, and then later on Google Image Search. So they already are having this conversation about what Web 2 and the internet has done for image making and image sharing. They're going in, manipulating the code of the image through filters, Danny in a more physical process. And with this piece in particular, Penelope is thinking about Web 3 as a cultural repository. So she specifically searched out images of the Swiss Alps. And buried in the Swiss Alps is a cultural data center for Swiss culture. And so thinking about how the blockchain not only is a method of creation, but also of preservation. And then with Danny, he's utilizing Google Image Search. A lot of his later works are these beautiful tableaus of three-dimensional objects that he sources from the internet, cuts and pastes together in a different collage-like manner. And here we have work from his portrait studio. So the nose likely doesn't belong to the person who has the ear, but he's put them all together to create these almost kind of grotesque reinterpretations of these portraits that are truly of many people. So with both of them and with Matt as well, there's this sense of inherent community in the work as well.
I'm particularly excited about this primitives piece by a collaborative studio, Miranda Lash, for a couple different reasons. But one of the things that makes code-based art so special is the ability for it to infinitely scale, regardless of the size of the screen. It can be recreated in the resolution of the monitor today in 10 years or 100 years. But the idea that that same code can output a 3D file that can then be 3D printed into a physical sculpture, and the same properties apply. So this particular sculpture could be remanufactured or reproduced in building size scale, and it would be exactly to the specs and to the dimensions of the original artist intended them to be. So this juxtaposition of being able to experience the code in a digital space and being able to rotate this piece and get a sense of all the different facets that are coming from it, and then also be able to have a physical thing in our home, which, as there's been a proliferation in digital art, we've seen a lot more digital art kind of entering our lives. We still are physical humans, and occasionally just want to have something physical. The artist's intent here of being able to combine the two, I think, is very special from a technical perspective. One of the things that makes on-chain generative art so special.
And I love that they're thinking about infinity and limitless possibility. And then here we have Alec Soth, who's one of the preeminent photographers of the 21st century, thinking about a very particular moment in time, which is the adoption of his daughter in Colombia. What I love too is that Alec is clearly embracing the future of the medium through this project. His work has always really pushed the boundaries of what we think of in art historical terms as the new document. What is a documentary image when it contains so much of the personal story of the photographer? And here he's translating that onto the NFT medium, onto the blockchain, making it forever through this new medium.
This is one of my favorite algorithmic works. It's called Himinn by an artist named Ridgley. And I think there's really something beautiful about being able to capture clouds. I think historically, as I've seen and explored the mediums of watercolor and oil on canvas, I see extensive amounts of effort and time and care into recreating clouds with a medium. And in this case, this is a cloud that was created entirely by code. And because this is a generative edition, an algorithmic edition, every single output has a different cloud. And so just like clouds are just kind of randomly put together by nature, it's really beautiful to see how a algorithm can also kind of randomly put a cloud together in a very natural way, and also have kind of some photorealistic elements to it, which tie it together. The idea that this can be a window to the outside in a dark room, I think is pretty special. And I think Ridgley really kind of nailed it with this piece.
And this is another image of clouds by Austin-based photographer Barry Stone, who similarly to Alec Soth is kind of working in this new documentary tradition. What does a straight image tell us about ourselves more so than the subject matter? And he's really taking inspiration from Alfred Stieglitz's iconic cloud studies called Equivalence, which he made in the 1920s and 1930s, which similarly were thinking about what does the imagery say about him more so than the clouds themselves. And what I love so much about this work is that Barry is going into the code of the JPEG, the inherently digital nature of this image, and manipulating the code to give us these fractures and breaks in the image itself. And so it's kind of a wonderful tie-in between what we think of as code-based works and what we think of as photographs, and kind of showing us that in some ways they're very, very linked.
So when one of these generative art pieces are created, there's a new kind of paradigm in art creation here where the artist and the collector experience the art at the exact same time. And what happens when you go to purchase an algorithmic piece is you know generally what it can look like, but we don't know exactly what the outputs can look like. So the moment that you make a purchase, a series of randomized characters are created, and those randomized characters are what dictate the final output. So in this piece here, it's called Gen 2 by my brother Daniel Calderon. This is a really special piece for me, specifically growing up with my brother always being into like Nintendo and video games and 8-bit stuff and being nerds about technology. But this is a demonstration of kind of how the hash specifically will generate something unique. And then once again, the way that the generative algorithm works is that it's interactive in this case. And so here, when this piece is first presented, you can click the screen and this kind of curtain comes over it, so you can exposing the main element. And then if you click it a bunch of times, a bunch of confetti comes out, which is something very typical of Daniel and kind of like adding little Easter eggs into the things that he does. So I have a lot to say about this piece for so many different reasons. So first of all, it's a beautiful piece called Dipolar by an artist named Junia Farquhar, who's a physicist. And one of the things that's really beautiful about algorithmic art is that, obviously with this kind of like necessity to understand how to code, there's generally a participation from people that are deep into science or code. And so this is a physicist who's applying some of the concepts of what she's working with to how the algorithm represents something as a piece of visual art. And what's really special about this, and kind of similar to the primitives piece that we talked about earlier, is that this is actually meant not only to be looked at on a beautiful screen, and it looks wonderful on a screen, but also to be applied. And so what she has done is she's included instructions for a plotter to recreate these pieces manually, physically. And one of the things that I really like about the plotter approach is that the artist is, once again, giving you the specifications to be able to reproduce the artwork in the exact specifications that they want it to exist, but you can do it at home, so it's kind of like DIY. You can mess it up, but you can also add a little bit of your own touch to it simply because you might use a different pen, a slightly different paper, and ultimately the design is the same, but every single time that you plot it, it also kind of adds to that surprise, that element of surprise, because it's always going to be a little bit different versus just printing this on a printer where every single piece is going to look exactly the same. The plotter, the ink, the paper, and all these things come together to give that slightly more elevated element of individuality that comes with each of these pieces. And I think this is a brilliant example of how that comes together. This is a piece called Polychrome Music, and it's a collaborative piece between Raphael Rosenthal and Danny Wolfers, also known as Lego Welt. This is an interesting piece in that the algorithm is not only creating these very bold and vibrant, colorful blocks, but they're being created in conjunction with sound. And so the algorithm is producing notes that are not just in sync with the piece, but they're unlimited and they will continue going forever. The visual elements and the audio elements will change over time to create this very interesting and kind of joyful composition, both visually and musically, that will run in eternity, never repeating. Each piece is unique in that they have different color schemes and different styles, but then once the piece starts going, it just kind of keeps going and going and going. I think it's a really fun example of how generative art can be both a physical and an audio, a visual and an audio